Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and thanks for joining me on this beautiful Monday evening. It's dark, it's cold, but we got our Christmas tree today. It should have come on Friday. It came here today, and I'll put up a picture later. You guys can have a look. Looks really awesome. So, Divine Mercy, very welcome. I did check my email, did read that, so I will respond to you afterwards. And thanks for being here. And Sergeant Grinch, it's really good to see you. Yeah, so after monotheism, this seems to be my most popular series. Um, yeah, it's definitely been entertaining doing this. It hasn't exactly made me a lot of friends, right? You do realize discussing Martin Luther doesn't make me a lot of friends, especially amongst Protestants. But D. Mieleman, very welcome. You appreciate the uniqueness of this content. Well, thank you very much. I do spend hours. I literally spend hours per day researching, checking. I mean, occasionally I find mistakes, or I find I can improve the material. I can tighten it or add to it. I found one quote which was written by Luther, but I thought it was said by Luther. It was actually something he wrote about the Pope. So, but yeah, that doesn't change the thesis. It just means that that particular quote, while it matched the tone of the rest, it was an attribution. So attribution error. So 1500 years of men's teaching God's word. Then Martin comes. Well, okay, so Sergeant Grinch says 1500 years of men teaching God's word. Then Martin comes along and tells everyone God was wrong. Yes, and every Christian before him was wrong. He does that. The man has this level of arrogance, of narcissism. So yes, that pretty much sums up Dr. Lutherfer. Maybe I should just start calling him that. Okay, yeah, so tell you what, let's dive in. So today we're going to be talking about unjustified by logic. Let's bring this up. Good morning, Tom. And yeah, James, if you are free in a little bit, we can always catch up and have a chat and see where we can talk on topics. I like talking about Irenaeus, Athanasius, heresy, and especially as I'll cover today and as I've covered before, you'll find that there's a certain overlap with Martin Luther and related topics. So yeah, let us jump in. So Martin Lutherfer, Martinus Lutherfer, unjustified by logic. And let's see why Martin Luther absolutely detested Aristotle. Logic called reason sin, called reason satanic, said that reason was Satan's whore, and of course why he did not like Thomas Aquinas. Now, it's not just because Thomas Aquinas pursued logic and, of course, the non-contradictory logic of Aristotle. There's also a financial incentive, but that's a discussion for a different time. But let's continue. So let's talk about 00 Luther, divinely licensed to kill. Did you know that God gave Martin Luther license to have people killed? Well, yes. Let's find out. This is in Martin Luther's Works, volume 54, and he writes here, preachers are the greatest murderers, because they admonish the ruler to do his duty and punish the guilty. I, Martin Luther, slew all the peasants in the uprising, for I ordered that they be put to death. All their blood is on my neck, but I refer it all to our Lord God, who commanded me to speak as I did. So, as you know, Martin Luther supported the peasants who revolted because they were being oppressed by the wealthy landowners, the princes, by the rulers of the day. He supported them and then he abandoned them, sided with the princes, and then he wrote that they should all be murdered. He said that whoever kills them will earn reward from God. Sounds a little bit like jihad, but hey, that's probably just coincidence. So, of course, Martin Luther says it was God who told him. In fact, God speaks through Martin Luther's mouth, as you know. Jesus sits in his mouth and talks out of his mouth because Luther speaks no word of a lie. Luther only speaks what Jesus would say because he's the mouthpiece of God. He's a prophet. So yes, and preachers are the greatest murderers. So just let your priest know that you appreciate his ability to, I don't know, just make sense of this, if you will. By the way, the peasants' uprising, Martin Luther, when he called for them to be killed, between 100,000 and 300,000 peasants were killed. Now, of course, that's in one uprising over about a year or so. if we look at the common talk of the Spanish Inquisition, the Black Legend, which apparently 50 million people died, which is complete garbage, only a maximum of 5,000 people died, maybe. Some put that figure as low as 800. So let's be generous. Let's say it was 3,000 people that died over 450 years during the Spanish Inquisition. Martin Luther had almost up to 300,000 people killed just a year. So yeah, so definitely much improved over those bloodthirsty Catholics, because Martin made things better. And Sergeant Grinch says, I appreciate your work. I cannot get these facts anywhere else. Thank you. Yeah, I do appreciate that. And yeah, guys, I do appreciate you all being here to have the conversation with me. And please share it. Please like the content. And of course, I do appreciate all the support. So yeah, that really does help. Like Allah spoke to Momo. Yeah, isn't that just sheer coincidence, Tom? You know, that Double O Luther has a license to kill. Let's continue. So we're going to go over some slides I covered last week. However, I've refined the arguments. I've improved them. I've also made them far more succinct. I've summarized them better. So hopefully we can now get into the whole justification by faith thing. And let's set some context. So, of course, we need to talk about this. This is the Lutheran manual, or the Lutheran propaganda. How proportional were those killings to the 1940s? Not sure what you mean, sense-wise. I mean, but Germany was much smaller then. It was a much smaller population. So that's going to be a significant portion of the population. I mean, Luther killed, because of the wars started after Luther, that Luther incited. I mean, I think Luther murdered up to, or because of his words and writings, up to 50% of the German population was killed. So definitely the guy was clearly holy, and definitely a great model, someone we should all try to do like him, basically. I said, yeah. So let us move on. Right. So it says here, the Lutheran is not only a living branch, but the main trunk of the historical Christian tree. It was not the Lutheran, but the Roman Catholics who severed themselves from pure primitive Christianity. If there was an apostasy, a falling away from the Church of Christ in the Reformation, it was Rome and not the Lutherans who were guilty. The evangelical Lutheran Church is built upon the pure Word of God. Of course, how he defines it? Well, yeah, he leaves those rules a little vague. And sacrament of the Lord Jesus Christ. Of course, we know historically there are 9 sacraments, but of course, Martin Luther could only find 2. And her ministry is descended in an unbroken line from the apostolic ordination, which is historical garbage. It is a fact capable of demonstration that no church in faith, worship, and order is in such accord with the church framed by Christ and the apostles as the Lutheran Church. Let me just make this a little small. There you go. Right. And it says, no other communion applies so fitly as to the Lutheran, the title, the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. In her is fulfilled the great investiture of the Lord Jesus Christ. Upon this rock I will build my church. Divine Mercy Apologetics, Luther was clearly bonkers. Man, you have great self-control, because, man, I wouldn't just say bonkers. Yeah, man. I really want to tell people how I really feel about this, man. Let's continue. So now, the Lutheran churches viewed themselves as the main trunk, and this is from Junius Benjamin Remensnyder from 1893. That's the Lutheran manual, right? You can find a copy on Google Books. So he speaks of the Lutheran Reformation. And of course, today you find many Protestants who want to deny that Luther had anything to do with the Reformation, even though in 2017 we celebrated 500 years of Martin Luther. Why? I don't know if he had nothing to do with it. Now, of course, the name Lutheran, as the name Christian, was first given to the disciples of Christ in derision, or as an insult. So those who adhered to the pure gospel in the era of the Reformation were derisively styled Lutherans. Luther was the hero of the Reformation, the providential agent, the agent of God of that blessed work. It was natural that those who clung to his doctrines should be associated with his name. And as I covered previously, Athanasius was saying that sects, heresies, always take the name, or very often, most often, take the name of their founder, and they cling to those doctrines of their founder. And here this man is actually using the same language. Another benefit of using this name arises from Luther's unique and marvelous personality. He's a miracle among men. Luther's the trumpet, which has roused the world from its lethargy. It is not as much Luther who speaks as God whose lightnings burst from his lips. Of course, he is a prophet. So yeah, and of course we spoke about how the Lutheran Church went full Nazi. But okay, this is Javier Perdomo, runs a YouTube channel, and he writes, in no way, Luther reformed. He didn't found. So he reformed the original church. You know, the church is always transforming, and Luther cleaned out the church. We maintain the true Catholic faith from the apostles. Anyone saying different needs church history lessons. I would suggest that Javier Perdomo needs church history lessons. Think of us as Reformed Catholic, not Protestant startup. Let's have a look through this. So this is Medieval Heretics as Protestant Martyrs. This is a Cambridge book. It's written, now this article that I'm going to refer to by Ewan Cameron, this is a full-blown theologian, full-blown priest. Okay, so this guy knows his stuff and he teaches. And he says here, two themes which figure repeatedly in the history of the Western Church are the contrasting ones of tradition and renewal. And he says the tension between these two themes has broken into open conflict. The Protestant reformers present one of the most extreme cases where the desire for renewal triumphed over continuity of witness. So this Protestant academic is telling us that the reformers, the Protestant reformers, broke from continuity of witness, from the lineage of the apostles, to create something new. And a fundamentally novel analysis of the process by which human souls were saved was formulated by Martin Luther in the course of debate and soon adopted or reinvented by others. In other words, they followed the MSU 13 principle, which I learned in the Middle East, which is from my military friends, which is MSU is for make stuff up, rule 13, although they didn't use the word stuff. This analysis was then used as a touchstone against which to test and attack the most prominent features of contemporary teaching, worship, and church polity. Insofar as any appeal was made to Christian antiquity, it was to the Bible. And of course, not every Bible, not any Bible, just very particular, they were very particular about how they quoted the Bible. And of course, to the early fathers, although even the early church fathers could be selected and criticized if they deviated from the primary articles of faith. Now, of course, Martin Luther eventually said, screw those guys. We don't care about them. Ignore them. They're not important. They're all wrong. Listen only to me. I've covered this before. Martin Luther was extremely derisive, extremely insulting and dismissive of the church fathers, of church history. We'll continue and we'll find out that this theme continues. Martin Luther just dismisses all of the past. He throws out the baby with the bathwater. So there was, he writes, this is Ewan Cameron writes, or Father Ewan Cameron writes, there was no reason why any of the reformers should have sought to justify their actions by reference to any forebears or forerunners in the Middle Ages, whether real or spurious. So why did they? If they were part of the original apostolic lineage, why did they have to say, no, our church comes from, well, what turns out to be, quite bluntly, heretics? Because medieval heretics were lauded as Protestant martyrs. Now, in order to prove this particular claim, true apostolic continuity requires unbroken teaching succession from the apostles, the doctrinal consistency with the early church, which is where Martin Luther said, no, history doesn't matter. History's wrong. I'm right. Ignore all of the early writings, ignore the early church fathers, ignore everyone who's not Martin Luther. And also you need a continuous historical presence. So, premise 2, you need historical facts. So, Lutheran churches began in 1516. There's a 1500-year gap. Now, they started as a Catholic schism. Premise 3, some key contradictions. There are novel doctrines, sola scriptura, sola fide, that were absent in the early church. There's no evidence of Lutheran teachings pre-Luther except in known heresies. There's a clear organizational beginning point in the 16th century. Now, there were grumblings prior, and there are certain names we can refer to. We will refer to one or two. But we know that, of course, 500 years ago, 2017, this whole big celebration of 500 years of something, because Christianity is only 500 years old now. Actually, technically, 507 years old. The logical conclusion is that the claim that the Lutheran Church maintains unbroken apostolic continuity violates the law of non-contradiction, because a church cannot begin in 1516 and have an unbroken continuity from 33 AD. A doctrine cannot be novel, and we were just told by this great scholar that it's novel 16th century doctrines and continuous from apostolic times. An organization cannot have a clear starting date and claim unbroken existence before that date. So on this basis, the Lutheran claim of apostolic continuity is logically false. And also, this does not factor in the writings of the early church fathers and all known historical beliefs and practices. Divine Mercy, would you like to join me? You're welcome to jump into the stream. Shall I send you a link? Let me know and I will invite you up. So just drop a yes in the chat and I will send you the link, and you're welcome to join me as I go through these slides. And you can add some comment. Yeah, so let's see. Yes, so just as Jehovah's Witnesses take from Arius and Arianism, most reformers take from Lutherfer, correct. And of course, then they add their own particular spin to the issue. So welcome, guys. Those of you who are here, good to see you all. Let's continue. So, medieval heretics as Protestant martyrs. Now, this is Martin Luther. This was in the original Latin. I myself, when I was a papist, truly and from the heart, hated those Picard brothers with great zeal for God and religion. Finally, when I'd once carelessly come across some books of Jan Hus, and I'd seen the scriptures treated so powerfully and purely that I began to wonder why such a great man had been burned by the Pope and Council. I was soon terrified, closed the book, suspecting that poison lay beneath the honey. Then my heart began to rejoice, and after surveying all of those whom the Pope had condemned and lost as heretics, I praised them as saints and martyrs. So all of the people the Pope had condemned as heretics, Martin Luther praised them as saints and martyrs, especially those whose pious writings or confessions I could find. Oh yeah, most assuredly. Let's continue. Now, this is in the study called Medieval Heretics as Protestant Martyrs. It's a very long book. It's got about 30 different essays, and I just picked one of them because we can't be here for a week reading through the whole thing. But this was the most interesting one, so I read this one. It's really good. It's only about 10 pages long. Right, so just briefly, so there's some references here. Luther refers to the Picards as the wall dancers. Picard was a term of derision used by opponents of the Bohemian Brethren. That's in Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, as we call it today. So the Picards, right, were a Hussite group, followers of Jan Hus, who were extremely warlike. These people were doing their jihad in a big way. They denied the real presence of Christ in community, so that goes against early church practice. And they were exterminated by other Hussites for being heretics. So the Martin Luther loves Jan Hus, loves the Hussites, supports the Hussites, find them that these are the real Christians. And of course, these Picards are the real Christians. And the Hussites murdered the Picards because they're heretics, but they're real Christians. Martin Luther makes a lot of sense, as you can see. Now, as a note here, it says, part of this text, there was a great deal of variety among the Waldenses when it came to specific beliefs. They were all over the place. All of these heretics are largely all over the place. They're just not even consistent amongst themselves. Reminds me of Protestantism. In general, they were noted for their focus on the vernacular reading of Scripture. Luther wanted vernacular reading of Scripture, so he wrote his own Bible after 150 different versions were already written. Refusal to swear oaths except to avoid execution, which sounds like taqiyya by Muslims. Denial of purgatory. Beyond that, some Waldensian groups embraced Catholic practice and doctrine. So they were almost indistinguishable from Catholics in some ways. While others called for a complete renunciation of the Catholic Church, totally opposite doctrine. So these people, opposite day is every day. So yeah, I'm not sure how Luther finds these to be real Christians, but let's continue. Now, Martin Luther on the bondage of the will to the venerable Mr. Erasmus of Rotterdam. Now we get to the important crux of the matter. And he says, how many saints think you have these soul and special inquisitors of heretical pravity burned and slain, such as Jan Hus and the like? So Luther clearly has a soft spot for heresies and heretics. Just as Christ himself confesses that the children of this world are wiser than the children of light, right? And he says here, he thanks Erasmus, says, instead of wearing me out with those extraneous points, the papacy, purgatory, and indulgences, extraneous means irrelevant, unimportant, that are fitly called trifles, unimportant. He says, these are not matters of debate, but nearly all my opponents have been hunting me in vain on these matters. You are the single and solitary individual who has seen the hinge of the matters in dispute, and you have aimed at the neck, just like the Muslims do. I wonder where he got that quote. So, of course, he says, I thank you for this. And what was the hinge? And this is where we're going to take this particular discussion from. The hinge is free will. Martin Luther denied free will. Now, someone came on my channel a little earlier to contradict me on the point and say, no, 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 the reformers believed in this. Just trash, garbage, nonsense, false, wrong, amateur. No, Martin Luther, Calvin denied free will. And of course, now, unfortunately, these Protestants are just making assertions, not bringing evidence. So let's hope I can present some evidence. Wasn't there a monetary reason as to why they departed from Catholicism? Yes, Martin Luther was an Augustinian. And what happened was a couple of things actually happened. So this is off topic, and I'll get to this in the future. But one, Martin Luther wanted to become a cardinal. He wanted a higher position in the church. He wanted at least to be made bishop. And the Pope didn't give him a title. The bishop, told him, go back to your monastery and just remain a monk for now. And Martin Luther, being the ambitious, narcissistic, arrogant individual he was, said, well, if you won't make me a bishop or a cardinal, I am now going to denounce you, and I'm going to call you Satan, and I'm going to start my own church. So that was Martin Luther. And two, the issue of indulgences, as Martin Luther makes clear, indulgences were important, but the Augustinians were in charge of indulgences. Now, that's a whole different story. There's a lot of misrepresentation and lies there, but the issue is that Augustinians were in charge of indulgences. What happened is then, for whatever reasons, the issue of handling indulgences was moved to the Thomas Aquinas was not an Augustinian. He was a different group. Can't remember the name of the group now. Just slipped my mind. So what happened is that managing the finances moved from the Augustinians to the Dominicans. And Martin Luther, being the gang member that he was, said, well, if those guys want to manage the money, me and my mafia, we're not friends with them anymore. And so because Thomas Aquinas was part of the Dominicans, that meant gang fight. And of course, he didn't like Thomas Aquinas anymore after that. So yeah, thanks, Philip. Yeah. So anyway, so let's continue, but that's another topic. So let's talk a little bit about Jan Hus's great legacy. This is Giovanni Hus, Il Veridico. Jan Hus, the Truthful, written by a man called Benito Mussolini. So Jan Hus's great legacy. Jan Hus was a proto-Protestant. He inspired Martin Luther. Luther was an inspiration and aid to the Nazis in their program. As you know, we've discussed on several episodes over 5 or 6 hours, I've discussed just how critical Martin Luther was to the Nazi program, proto-Nazi that he was. And Hus further inspired the creator of fascism, Benito Mussolini, who wrote a book about Jan Hus. So let me see. The Nazis loved Martin Luther because Martin Luther had written a book about genocide of Jews, which the Nazis found very, very helpful in their anti-Jewish program. And of course, Mussolini, the very close friend here of this guy with, that dude, wrote a book about, so you can see the kind of inspiration that Martin Luther and Jan Hus provided to some of the world's worst tyrants and despots. So, let's continue. I hope that the reading of these pages will familiarize the public of independent thinkers with the epoch, the life, and the work of the least known of the heretics who lived north of the Alps. That's Jan Hus. And this may arouse in the minds of its readers a hatred of every form of spiritual and secular tyranny, whether it be a theocratic or Jacobite. So obviously hate the Catholic Church because we are free thinkers. Free thinkers, let me see, atheists deem themselves free thinkers. That's from the French Revolution and onwards, from the secular Enlightenment. And of course, Martin Luther is a free thinker. Jan Hus is a free thinker. And they were all genocidal atheist maniacs. And these are all free thinkers, and they're inspired by Martin Luther, who's a free thinker, and Jan Hus is a free thinker. So yeah, that's a little bit of a conflict with Christianity. You may get the vibe there. The occasion for writing the book was given to Mussolini by the Free Thinking International Conference, the Free Thinkers International Conference, which was to take place in Prague in 1915 to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the death of Jan Hus. Interestingly, and then of course I will come to when I do my talks on the Unitarian movement, which is just Islam light. A chalice, flaming chalice, became the main Hussite symbol. And during World War II, the European Unitarian Universalists co-opted the flaming chalice. They claim it has nothing to do with Jan Hus, but he was a free thinker. They're free thinkers. But of course, it's got nothing to do with Islam. So, moving on. So, Martin Luther did say that all these heretics, all the people that the Pope had declared as heretics, he saw them as Christians and he saw them as martyrs. Now, the word all is a universal affirmation. Yes, welcome, villainous. Free thinkers are the same as believing lies. Yeah, it's making up stuff to suit your own fancy, pretty much. Right. So the all is a universal affirmation because Luther identifies groups with beliefs that are fundamentally heretical by Orthodox Christian standards as saints and martyrs. So these heretical groups, and we're going to look at a couple of them at least, while vilifying the Catholic Church for condemning them, and several contradictions arise. There's a contradiction with orthodoxy. First, asserting that heretical groups who held beliefs such as Gnosticism, dualism, denial of the incarnation are saints. This contradicts fundamental Christian doctrines that define Christian orthodoxy. Inconsistency of standards. Praising groups with contradictory theological positions, remember, they couldn't even agree amongst themselves, challenges the consistency of applying any kind of criteria. It implies that heterodox beliefs are equally valid, that Christian beliefs are, so someone who believes that Christ was real, that Christ was the Son of God, is equally as valid and correct as someone who says Jesus never existed. Jesus was just a phantom. Jesus was a just a man who Jesus, and God liked him because he was a good teacher. These are all equally valid views. And this is what Martin Luther is implying and stating here. And this, of course, undermines Christianity. This is not Christian. And this conflicts with having any coherent doctrinal standard. The standard was, as in a paper that I've covered previously, which I will mention, is that as long as you're anti-Catholic, you're good to go. And also, this is historical revisionism. So vilifying the Catholic Church's historical role in condemning heresy, while simultaneously affirming all the condemned as saints, shows a lack of differentiation between legitimate and illegitimate persecutions. He overlooks the historical context and the rationale behind the Church's doctrinal defenses. He doesn't care about history, doesn't care about facts. So his position is logically incoherent if you maintain any kind of commitment to Orthodox Christian standards. He conflates fundamentally opposing theological positions with sainthood, undermining the foundations of Christian belief. Hopefully this is clear, and we will certainly come to more of this. Let's continue. Now, Cathar Gnostics are not Christians. And again, back to this medieval heretics as Protestant martyrs by Ewan Cameron. We've already covered this. That's in Studies in Church History, volume 60, The Church, Hypocrisy and Dissimulation. Let's continue. So, darn it, for some reason, this has not disappeared. Let me go. Now I can just make this one disappear, pull it out here. Let me replay this. Okay, so, right. Now, the author is a Protestant. He's a very liberal Protestant, in fact. So he writes very carefully. He doesn't want to condemn Luther, but he wants to highlight a problem without shooting himself in the foot and making himself unpopular. Now, much more problematical to our eyes was the attempt to run together the Waldenses and the Albigenses or Cathars, because these are two different groups, commonly conflated, but not really the same. The Cathars were, after all, almost certainly dualist heretics, albeit varying between moderate and extreme dualism, whose theology diverged on a whole range of fundamental themes from Orthodox Christianity. These people were flaming heretics. It's like saying that gay dude is not gay when he's clearly in the pride costume, wearing the doggy mask and doing some crazy things in public and going, no, that's a great masculine example of heteronormativity. It's like, no, the evidence speaks for itself. So the early Waldenses had been so close to orthodoxy that in their most primitive stage, it had been claimed that the only deviation was the insistence of preaching without sanction from the hierarchy. So I'm going to drop the quote in the chat for you, and you can join us, Divine Mercy. You should see the link pop up in just a moment. Okay, let's continue here. Now, the Cathars had several positions that directly contradicted core Christian doctrinal principles. One, Gnostic dualism. So let me see. Yes, I did drop it in the chat. It should be visible to you. So they believed in two equal and opposing forces, a good spirit, right? A good God. This is Gnosticism. I've covered Gnosticism for 20 hours on this channel. And also an evil God. So two opposing gods, but you see, they bring balance to the force, Gnosticism. See, so there's no see, you have to have balance. You need good and evil to have no. So this is not Christian at all. There's evil and there's good, and they're two separate things. This directly contradicts Christian monotheism and creation theology. And very welcome.
Hey, do you hear me well?
Yeah, coming through okay, I think. Well, let's see the audience. Let me know with 1 if audio is good. So welcome. How are you doing?
Not bad. How are you? God bless you. Thank you for all your hard work combating this doctrine of demons.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I've spent too many hours on this. I still have another. I could write a book on this. I've got about 350 slides on this. It's full now.
Yeah. I'm just gonna give a quick preface as to why I wear a mask. The Muslims put like 140 grand on my head. I read and speak Arabic, and I think I put them through heck for 5 years on TikTok. So
Okay.
At one point they started putting numbers on my head. So I figured to protect my identity and to protect my family, I'd wear a mask.
I understand. Actually, I reached out to someone who also puts out Islamic content. He's got a PhD, I believe, in Islamic studies. Mm-hmm. He speaks Arabic, writes Arabic. And I wrote to him. Now, he obviously, on his videos, he only has his voice, doesn't show his face, of course. And then I wrote to him and said, hey, look, would you like to come on my channel and talk about this topic and particular topic? And he said, no, I can't. I'm afraid for my safety. And I'm like, I didn't say like you got to like have the camera on and like hold up a card with your address, but okay. So yeah, whatever. Well, but thanks for coming on.
I'm here to learn, man. You're very impressive in how much and as to how far and how much you go in depth on these matters. And it's very, 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 very good for people to wake up and to realize that a Christian supposed division that occurs 500 years ago cannot be true. As you put it, it contradicts the law of non-con. It cannot be true. It cannot hold true to the ancient faith. So I'm happy to learn. And
all right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so just jump in if you have a point. Let me know. Just raise your hand or whatever. And sure. Yeah, so of course the Cathar Gnostics. Luther implies that these Gnostics are Christians. They're saints. They're martyrs. So of course, it's a Christological heresy. They denied Christ's physical incarnation. They said that Jesus had a phantom body. These are Gnostics. He had no real flesh. They rejected the reality of Christ's physical suffering and death. These are Gnostics. Gnostics, at the end of the day, are satanic. They viewed the material world as inherently evil, and God made the world and it was good. Yes?
Well, St. John writes about this, right? St. John writes about this. You have to proclaim that the Lord was risen in the flesh.
In the flesh, yes. Right. Yeah.
So
correct.
One of our earliest heresies, as a matter of fact. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, these are anti-Christian heretics. And Martin Luther, the wise doctor, it's so hard for me not to swear when I talk about Luther. Good grief, it's so hard. The man to call him an idiot is to be kind to Luther and to insult idiots.
Right. So please don't speak of idiots in that manner, please.
Yeah, I know it gives idiots a bad name. So they also rejected the Genesis account of God creating all things good. They rejected the Bible because, as you know, sola scriptura, scripture is sacred, except we need to take these multiple books out of the Bible and edit a few passages here and there to make it acceptable. Then it will be great. But yeah, so, and of course they rejected the Genesis account and they considered procreation sinful because it trapped souls in material bodies, and women were considered sinful because they have kids, and having kids is evil because you're creating more dirty matter. So yeah, I can see how that's very Christian theology.
Right.
They also denied baptism. They said that stuff is a waste of time. It doesn't work. The Eucharist, what? Christ died for who? And they rejected marriage as a sacrament. And I mean, there's lots of stories about these guys with their orgies and so on. You'll hear those if you have a look. and they oppose the use of any material elements in worship, just like the Muslims do. So, yeah, they taught reincarnation until you reach spiritual perfection. So maybe they were Buddhists. They rejected the resurrection of the body. They defied or denied final judgment, as we understand in Christianity. So you can see Martin Luther was very wise in identifying these guys as original Orthodox Christian saints. Any comment before I go on?
No, there's really nothing you could say. How many sacraments would you say he rejected? Because
7.
so far you said all 7.
No, actually, no. There's technically it depends. If you do count 7 and 9 sacraments, Martin Luther only accepted 2 sacraments: baptism and the Eucharist. But he eventually changed how he viewed the Eucharist.
Right. Well, I know that because I've looked into the German of the Luther's works. I know he doesn't use the term consubstantiality, but he does denote 2 natures and an accident. I'm actually very good at the Eucharistology, and I did look into what he taught, and what he taught was inherently Nestorian, because he's saying within the one host there are 2 substances,
Right.
and they are consubstantial. And we don't,
Right.
of course, in ancient tradition, we would say one substance, one accident, substance transforms, accident remains, right? But he actually espoused Nestorianism in his view of Eucharist. So,
Which is interesting because you can find he's also explicitly Marcion. Well, he espouses Marcion's doctrine or Marcionite doctrine, and you can trace strong Manichaean doctrine in his teachings as well. So this man was just taking from a whole smorgasbord of heresies, of Gnostic heresies, and saying, yeah, that's good, that's good, that's good. As long as it's not Catholic, it's good.
Right. It's and look what it's become today, Lloyd.
Yeah.
Honestly, seriously, look what it's become today. It's kind of sad.
Yeah.
So shall we continue?
Yeah. So the Cathars rejected fundamental Christian metaphysics and theology, and the Waldenses, they primarily challenged church authority, which Martin Luther also did, which Jan Hus did, of course, went well beyond just that. And of course, some Waldenses maintained Orthodox beliefs. So, of course, all of these people were just all over the place, because that's what happens when you just make things up as you go. Yeah, so Resolute Thomism says, yeah, Marcionism, Marcellianism, Manichaeism, all Gnostic heresies. Exactly, and Martin Luther samples all of these. We'll cover his Manichaean nonsense. I've already covered his Marcionite thing. I've actually got a Catholic priest that I know in the US who's supposed to come on at some point, Father David Lynch. Is David Lynch? He's supposed to come on and talk about that particular, the Marcionite connection to Luther, why it was so important for him. But yeah, when he does that, hopefully next year we can do that. But I will do the Manichaean aspect. Okay, so Luther, the clown of logic and denier of free will. So what Erasmus identified, Luther says, is the core issue of Martin Luther's theology, and that is free will. He denies free will. So Erasmus is the only one among Luther's adversaries who focus on the central question, rather than getting sidetracked by what Luther said were peripheral or unimportant issues like the papacy, purgatory, and indulgences. Not that Luther didn't make a big noise about all of these things. Now, the word extraneous is things that are irrelevant or not essential. So he criticizes his opponents and says, look, you guys are wasting your time on trifles. The core matter is the question of free will. So the main debate is around the nature of free will and its implications for salvation and divine grace. And this is where we're going to get into a lengthy, but hopefully simple, easily understandable discussion based heavily on logic on the issue of justification by faith, or shall we say, unjustification by logic. So Luther agrees this is the critical point of contention in his theological discussion. Any comment you want to make, James?
No, I'm interested because I was the popular thought is it was John Calvin who rejected free will and who perhaps held to double ultimacy. I'm going to ask you a question. Does Lutherfer hold to double ultimacy? Meaning, does God reprobate?
The word I'm not familiar with, I know, because I have a different word for it, but effectively double predestination, yes. Now, they phrase it a little differently. If you read, for instance, Calvin's the Westminster Declaration, right? When you read it, it is extremely dense language. I mean, my gosh, it is incredibly dense language. The reason is I think it's designed to be gobbledygook, to be word salad spaghetti, because they want to confuse you. They want to imply, the language implies free will, but when you read the language, once you do a basic propositional logical analysis, it clearly denies free will, but they want to imply that you have free will. So they don't come out and say it. They want to have their cake and eat it, because they realize that if they claim that there's no free will, basically theological determinism, that's going to turn people off, which means you are damned unless God chooses you. So it's a lottery. If you're not lucky, then you're going straight to hell. Bye-bye. So this is what they're trying to avoid. So, but Calvin gets this from Luther. Luther initiates. So Calvin gets a lot of stuff from Luther. The thing is that the 95% of the Lutheran standard narrative is just false. It's just lies. It's propaganda. That's why I'm doing the series, to actually show you that the whole story of Luther is just garbage. The man was an amateur theologian. The man was trash. His theology is trash. Honestly, it's the biggest load of crap I've ever read in my life. And I spend hours reading it every day. It's just garbage. So, and so's Calvin for that matter. And then, of course, Zwingli, you read him and you're like, this guy's what, 5 years old? Like, good God. Sorry, but I'm not impressed. I'm absolutely unimpressed. Your thoughts?
Well, no, I did read a lot. Like I said, I read a lot of the German stuff. I do have the manuscripts, luckily, with access to databases. But the thing is about Luther, which was interesting, is that he didn't reject like the very controversial modern notions, such as like Mariology. He had a pretty high view of Mariology.
Let me get into that briefly. So I'm not. I've covered that in the past. He eventually reverses his position. So at one point he holds the Catholic position, and then at a later point he repudiates that. He rejects that. Let me just bring something up here.
If I'm making you, like, if I'm distracting you or taking you off topic, then let's just move forward. I love what you're doing, and I'm excited. And the notion of free will is going to be huge, right?
No, so look, yeah, obviously it's sold that there's such a thing as free will, but that's one of those little things you don't talk about. So let me just find this and bring it up so we can just move on past that. Here we go. This is Luther doing Luther. I'm going to show you guys this. I've already covered this on my channel, but I do understand repetition. So Martin Luther writes here. Then also Mary's help was invoked, who was to show Christ her breasts as a reminder.
All right, I'm good.
Do you care to explain what Martin Luther could have meant here?
I'm thinking the idea of breastfeeding, maybe, to show that the mother, she is still the mother of the son, and the mother is always mothering and therefore always in support of the son. Maybe?
No, you know what? The crazy thing is when you read this, I was reading Martin Luther. Of course, I'm busy reading Martin Luther because who doesn't, right? For fun. And he's writing about how Jesus is not a judge. Jesus will not judge you. Jesus does not judge you. Jesus did not come as a judge. Jesus' purpose is not to judge. Jesus is never going to judge you. Of course, Jesus is going to judge you, and he's the judge, but Jesus will not judge you. He's never going to judge you. He does not judge anybody. He will not judge anybody, except for he's going to judge you, but he will never judge you. So don't worry about that. I kid you not. I wish I were kidding. I wish I am kidding about this idiot. But anyway, that's Martin Luther. And then, so in the middle of saying Jesus will not judge you, Jesus is not a judge, Jesus will never judge you. And then also Mary's help was invoked, who was to show Christ her breasts as a reminder. But Jesus will not judge you. Jesus is never going to judge you. He won't judge you. That sentence is just randomly in the middle of a bunch of theological garbage.
Yeah, no, I take it back. He is definitely. Now, I know that maybe this might not appeal to you, but a lot of saints have had dreams, and particularly, I'm not going to say any names, but apparently he's burning in hell. So, yeah,
you know,
maybe that was supposedly God's will, because he doesn't believe in free will, right?
So anyways, as you know, so that's in the Martin Luther Bible, and that's the verse that got eaten by a goat, sadly. And it's called the "Show me your boobies, Mary" verse, but Martin Luther wisely left it out, or something. Yeah. So that's Martin Luther. Do you understand how unhealthy this man's mind was?
I know that there are a few quotes, such as him saying that he is greater than Saint Ambrose.
No,
Those
he
kind
said
of
he was
quotes.
greater than everybody. Everybody. He's greater than every single church father. And he says, and if anyone, even greater than the church fathers, disagrees with anything I write, they are wrong. Ignore them. Only listen to me. You can only learn the scriptures by reading me. In other words, he implies, and he states it, I'm greater than Peter, Paul, James. He says, even in fact, he says, James, he reads James and says, that is false. He says that what James is writing is false, and thus he rejects it.
Right. Didn't he call it straw?
Oh, dude, he goes well beyond. You see, the problem is that the historians quote these basic things because they're defensible. They're nice. They're mild. They're mild rebukes. Oh, Luther only called it straw. It's not too bad. Let's move on. No, once you get to Luther's actual thesis and you read what he said, it goes well beyond these little nice claims they're willing to admit to. Understand?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, So now in the bondage of the will, right, Lutherfer argues against the concept of free will. This is not the only place, but I've covered it before, but asserting that the human will is inherently bound and cannot choose good. The will is not capable of choosing good and is locked into choose evil only mode. The will can only choose evil. That's the only choice available. In fact, it's all you can do is move towards evil. Now, we're going to see that Martin Luther is an incoherent, illogical, irrational twit as we go through this. Now, Luther claims that if the will were truly free, it would be able to choose good independently. He's going to contradict himself in a moment. The idea of free will leads to confusion and undermines the necessity of grace for salvation. Right, so let's continue. So Luther states that the human will is bound and not capable of choosing good at all. Yet he argues that if the will were free, it could choose good independently. Of course, later he says, but for you to make a choice, you have to be touched by grace. God has to choose you, reach his hand down into the muck, lift you up, give you free grace or whatever the heck God gives you, and then your will is unbound. So until God does that, you are completely without free will. It's the infusion of grace that gives you free will, except if you had free will, if you had free will, you could choose, except you can't choose because until God... Do you understand the little bit of logical gaps the man leaves all lying all over the place here?
Oh, no, 100%. 100%.
So
and does that mean if God doesn't choose you, you're automatically reprobate?
Yes, exactly. We're going to cover all of this. I'm going to go through this step by step. We're going to quote Luther, and we're going to start working through this now. So he contradicts his own assertions. You'll find Martin Luther can't go 5 sentences without contradicting himself all over the place. So now the direct logical implication, what Martin Luther asserts here, is that God prevents humans from doing good. By default, God denies you the ability to do good. God locks you into a mode by his own choice that you can only do evil until God decides, I now give you grace, and therefore you can now start doing good. Until that, you can only do evil. And if you win the lottery and I give you grace, then good for you, and everyone else goes straight to hell. That is what we are left with. So let's continue. So Luther says, of course, right? So let me continue. Let's continue. So God becomes unfair and arbitrary. So this leads to divine favoritism. If God selectively, arbitrarily grants grace, it implies that this is favoritism that undermines human free will and autonomy. And we're going to unpack this one today. This contradicts with the Imago Dei, preventing humans from choosing good, which means God does evil, right? God only permits evil, right? This contradicts the belief that humans made in God's image well, we'll get to all that, inherently possess, right, moral understanding, and free choice is evident throughout the Bible. Now, I've got some additional text I can go to, but we'll skip over that. We'll still make the point. Relational disconnection. This leads us to deism, right? Martin Luther, remember we've spoken before, Martin Luther, his destruction of this theological connection, of this relationship to God, led to deism and led to atheism, led to the French Revolution, essentially, led to the whole secular atheist movement. So restricting human goodness implies a divide between God and humanity, conflicting with the concept of a loving guiding God. It's an evil God who locks you into evil. And this also leads to moral responsibility and accountability issues. Limiting human choice on moral grounds questions accountability, complicating the doctrine of sin and innocence. If you did something, how do you know you're saved? How do you know you've been touched by grace? How do you know? Send me a signed letter from God, preferably with burning letters on the signature, just so I know. Otherwise, how are you responsible for something when God took away your ability to choose and made you only do evil by his own will, by his choice? How are you accountable for the things that you do? Any comment on that, James?
The Imago Dei or Imago Dei. Are you going to go into that? Because I don't want to speak on it too much.
Little bit. So look, I'm not going to go into anything at length. I just want to introduce the topic because I'm not here to do like a huge theological discussion. I want to highlight everything in context of the free will, because this is the approach that people avoid, people miss, and I want to tackle it from that angle.
So in the regards of free will, for you to say that your image and likeness is lacking of free will, though your image and likeness is that of God's image and likeness, you would actually, by definition and logical reasoning, come to the conclusion that God lacks a free will, or a will that is free, which in and of itself is contradictory. But I'll let you get into that.
Okay, well, let's discuss that. Let's discuss that later. We can always have a follow-up, or maybe later if time allows. Right. But let me present the argument, and you provide some commentary on that. So, okay, this leads to theological confusion. So this position muddles the understanding of grace, free will, and morality, meaning it undermines and challenges any sort of coherent theological interpretation. And I'll explain all of these points as we go, and hopefully in a simple, understandable fashion. And here's also a parallel to divine command theory. This is an Islamic concept, right? I've covered this at length previously in my shows. So if God arbitrarily enables some to choose good while restricting others, this undermines natural law. The idea that moral truth is written on our hearts, as stated by St. Paul in Romans 2:15. This reduces morality to divine dictate rather than an inherent truth.
Right.
So then you are no longer made in the image of God. You are limited by God to doing only evil, which seems to violate the character of God. Any comment before I move on?
No, that's precisely what I was talking about when I made reference to the image of God in your point number 2 and free will. And indeed, you're right about Romans 2:12-16, where the law is written upon one's heart and their conscience bears witness. That's by virtue of creation.
We'll come back to
because,
that.
Yeah, you're right. Go ahead.
So Luther lacks logic. God prevents good. So Luther's contradiction on justification by faith. Let's break this down. Luther claims salvation is through faith alone, sola fide. Yet he also claims humans cannot choose good without divine enablement. This creates an irreconcilable contradiction. Either humans can choose to have faith, contradicting Luther's claim about human inability, or faith is merely divine programming, negating the concept of justification by faith.
Right.
If humans cannot choose good, they cannot choose faith. If God has to impose both the ability and the choice, it's not faith, but predetermination. God's pushing a little remote control, and you're going left. And he's pushing another button, and you're going right. That's all it is. God is controlling you. That is divine command. That means you have no free will. You're just a puppet operated by remote control. So this makes justification by faith meaningless because there is no genuine human response to grace. Your thoughts, James?
No, you're on point. I don't want to get into. I don't want to throw you off too much and sideline too much. But Elijah in the book of First Kings totally refutes Martin Luther. But we'll get into that another day. But I
didn't want to get. No, you're right. Look, there's lots of. I mean, there was the one, the previous page. I had a section written which I didn't go into because I don't want to spend. I mean, I'd like to keep it rather simple and not because people, when they talk about justification by faith, and I listen to hours of YouTube videos, it's gobbledygook. It may as well be advanced hyperspatial mathematics, right? And I think they deliberately make it confusing so that they just confuse the heck out of people who just give up and just say, okay, fine, preacher, I trust you, right? It's the trust me, bro thing. I'm trying to make it simple without overly copious evidence, just based on the issue of logic and the lack of free will.
Right.
And later we can always tackle it from a deeper theological perspective, but I'm hoping to make it accessible to everyone.
Right. And I see that you're presenting proper syllogisms, which is great. So
yeah, I did extensive talks on the channel, lectures on the channel on Aquinas, Aristotle, non-contradictory logic, scholasticism. So I've done extensive work on that on the channel. Right. So now the implications that if God prevents good. So in Luther's theology, your will is bound into choose evil only mode. Well, thank you very much. Albanian Christianity donated $5. Thank you. Says God bless you both, Lloyd and James. Well, thank you very much. Well, in the future, we can bring you up as well, because I'm looking to start a format where I bring people up and we have group discussions, maybe some small debates. I have very little patience with idiots, because I want answers, not rhetoric. But yeah, I'd definitely be happy to bring more people up and have more interactive discussions in the future. Okay, so let's see. Now, the idea that you are locked into choose evil only mode until God decides to unlock you, this contradicts divine justice, because Christianity teaches that God is just and loving, allowing for moral choice, because you cannot be blamed for something you do unless you had a choice, and then God punishes you because you did something wrong of your own volition, not because God forced you to do it, because you had no other choice. You cannot be punished for something you had no accountability for. So claiming that God prevents good contradicts his nature. Your thoughts, James?
no, I'm totally in line. Go ahead, brother.
Right. Next, this eliminates moral responsibility. So if humans cannot choose good, concepts of sin, repentance, and accountability become meaningless. This negates free will. The view creates a deterministic universe where human choices and relationship with God loses meaning. God again becomes arbitrary. So this creates a doctrinal crisis. The position contradicts established Christian teaching, causing church division and theological confusion. This false theological determinism by Lutherfer conflicts with biblical accounts. I'll do some very basic examples. We could be, James, we could be here for hours talking about contrary examples, right?
Yeah, no, tons. It's clear. I'm trying to locate coherence. There's thus far there's nothing coherent in what he said. So
no, agreed. Now, before we go on, I want to iterate that mystery, yes. Now, everyone's going to appeal to mystery. Well, but mystery. Yes, mystery plays a role in Christianity. However, mystery in Christianity is well defined and is not a blanket justification for any and all theological claims. Acknowledgement of mystery respects the limits of human understanding, and this is what we do as Christians, but we do not dismiss the need for logical coherence. Many aspects of Christian teaching are intended to be rationally comprehensible and are based on historical events, scriptural texts, and ethical teachings. Would you agree with that, James?
yes, and in terms of the fathers, when they spoke of mystery, I'm trying to touch on it quickly. In terms of the fathers, when they spoke of mystery, they spoke of the nature of grace, and as to how grace is inherent within our lives as the faithful. The only mystery that we can extrapolate is, for instance, within sacramentology. There is going to be a view of mystery in sacramentology, but mystery does not preclude the notion that God has, denigrated our free will as to be some sort of puppeteer that says, well, you're going to go to hell and you're going to go to heaven. Of course, we would agree.
Islam, that's divine command. That is
Right.
not Christian by any means. Yeah.
Right.
Go on, please.
No, that's it. That's it. I mean, we can, like I said, we can hold to mystery just within how the cooperation of God as first cause and us as second cause in the view of grace and how it affects our life as the lay faithful. That's it. Like, I don't see how mystery can allude to all these reprobative notions that Lutherfer is touching on.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary.
Jamie, you have a good point. The Catholic priest talk about William of Ockham. So look up my theological series. Also my stuff on nominalism, but look up theological. I speak of William of Ockham, William of Ockham was another very famous, highly respected, much lauded idiot. The man is incoherent and talks nothing but, there's a word for it. It starts with a P, has two O's, and ends with a P. It has other words just like it, but we're going to stick with this one. The man just talks utter poop. Once you read William of Ockham, and once you read about Occam's razor, now I'm actually going to refer to Occam's razor in this talk, and we're going to use it the way that we use it today. But if you look at how William of Ockham actually meant Occam's razor back then when he created it, he had a completely different purpose in mind. But that's a discussion for another time.
Right.
So yeah, but William of Ockham was a nominalist. He did not believe in objective theology, and lots of people, well, Luther wasn't a nominalist. Oh no, Luther was a nominalist, but a really mild. Oh, good grief! I've covered that at length. Both of these people were irrational, incoherent, philosophical fools. But look, this is just me. This is just me saying what I say. Look, I say what I say. Okay, I tend to say things very bluntly and boldly because I spent copious hours, too many hours reading this stuff and going, this is trash. Okay, moving on. Is God unfair? Or is Satan? Or maybe Allah? Who knows who we're talking about here? Right. If only those who receive grace can make good choices, this implies a different standard for those whose wills are perceived as trapped and incapable of choosing good, or in a sense, only capable of choosing evil. That's the only avenue God leaves open for you. So this raises issues. There's inequity of judgment. So individuals without grace are judged by a standard they cannot meet, creating an inconsistency on divine judgment. God's going to judge you for doing evil, but God doesn't permit you to do evil. Do you think that's fair, James?
No, if God's not granting you the grace, and which means in the opposite frame you would be doing evil, then God's doing this, and then therefore God's going to judge you upon something God's doing within you. I mean, what's the point of judgment if God's doing it?
Yeah,
right?
It makes no sense.
Yeah.
There's no moral accountability. If some are unable to do good due to their condition, it calls into question the basis for moral accountability and responsibility. God did it, not me. Okay, great excuse. Remember, God spoke through Luther's mouth and made Luther write, kill the peasants. Hundreds of thousands of people died because Luther didn't do it, God did it. In fact, Luther writes, the hand that kills the peasants is not the hand of the soldier, it's the hand of God. The hand that hangs, slaughters, disembowels, decapitates these peasants, that's the hand of God. And because Luther, I guess. Any thought before I go on, James?
No, it's sick. It's just sickening. Just sickening.
No. Resolute Thomas, come back and we'll be sure to have you on at some point and we can discuss. It'll be good to have a panel discussion. So please get in touch. All right, we'll see you soon. Okay, so let's continue. The nature of grace is called into question. So the perspective undermines the concept of grace itself. It arbitrarily favors some while leaving others without capacity for good. And doing evil has consequences. Why doesn't God allow you to not do something evil so that you can spare yourself the consequences? Is this a teachable moment, or is God just capricious? I mean, this is really, it's a crazy question. And it complicates the concept of salvation, as it implies that some individuals are predetermined to do evil due to a lack of grace. You don't all have the same capability to make choices. No. God has predetermined you for evil and for punishment, which means unfairness. So Luther's amateur, illogical, low IQ theology undermines justice, accountability, the nature of divine grace. It insults the nature of God, the character of God, within the Christian theological framework. Any comment before I move on?
No, I don't. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, so J.P. Perrin, this Frenchman, writes, the heretics are our witness. The heretics, ancient heresies, medieval heresies, are the witness of the Protestant movement. He says the bloody rage of that great Antichrist of Rome and his superstitious adherents against the true Church of Christ, the Protestants, Luther, and the faithful professors of his gospel, declared at large in the history of the Waldenses and the Albigenses. We just discussed the Albigenses didn't even believe as God as a real human. There was no incarnation. These are heretics. These are outright, even by Protestant standards, these are outright heretics. But he's saying, no, these are the saints, these are the martyrs, these are the good Christians, these are our examples, our forebears, the great saints that we should revere. It's like they've obviously run out of people to revere, but okay. And apparently manifesting unto the world the visibility of our Church of England. I wasn't aware that people who deny the incarnation, talk about reincarnation, deny that Jesus was born of a Virgin Mary, and all of these things are good Christians. But okay, that's why the Church of England and me have parted ways, because, yeah. And of all the Reformed churches throughout Christendom for about 450 years past. Any thoughts on that, James?
So I'm confused. Is he J.P. Perrin? Is he against the Church of England?
No, he's with the Church of England. He's saying that these heretics bear witness of the great faith of the Church of England and against these Catholics, these evil Catholics.
Okay, all right. No, I got nothing to add, man. It's pretty low-hanging fruit, if I can be honest.
Yeah. So this text is called Luther's Forerunners, or a cloud of witnesses deposing for the Protestant faith, or bearing witness for the Protestant faith. It's like saying the Nazis were the forerunners of my great Baptist church, my great Fourth Avenue Baptist church, because these were the true Christians. They followed Christ. It's like, huh? Understand it? It says whack job is that. It's just crazy to me. Okay, so English Evangelical Historians on the Origins of the Reformation. That's another text. I haven't read that one, but it's just, you're welcome to look it up if you so choose. I've covered this at length in the past. And of course, these guys also claim that the Catholic Church is not descended from the primitive church, unlike the Albigenses and Waldenses, who are complete heretics, who did, supposedly. But anyway, we've made that point, so I'll move on. So these are two overlapping studies. This one, Martyrs and Martyrdom, right? Studies in church history, which I've covered here. And this one is I've covered on my channel, Where Was Your Church Before Luther? And it says one of the most pressing issues for Protestants was to locate an appropriate answer for a disarmingly simple Catholic question. Where was your church before Luther? And the Reformed religion was considered to be in league with monarchs and aristocrats. And they were. Luther was. He was in their pocket, advancing their own political power, plundering the wealth of the church, which they did. The Protestant Reformation was theft on a grand scale from the Catholic Church. And Catholic apologists usually designated Luther and Calvin as Manichaean heretics. And I think we will cover that in the future. And we will see there's more than a little bit of Manichaeism. I've already covered Calvin, and you can see the Gnostic strand there. And this was from the 3rd century dualist heresy of Manes. And I've covered this on my channel at length. And every single Protestant group insists that they go to the apostles through numerous heresies. Comment before I go on?
No, you're hitting it right on the nose.
Right, so let's do a logical analysis of justification by faith. Now, this is Martin Luther. I'm going to take a couple of things from his Heidelberg disputation. I'll come to that in a minute. But he says it is certain that man must utterly despair of his own ability before he's prepared to receive the grace of Christ. So you need to be in despair. You're a sick, dirty, foul man. That's his view of humanity, which is a little extreme. So a logical analysis of Luther's doctrine, right? Looking at contradictions and biblical evidence. So in this lecture, I want to examine the logical structure of Luther's doctrine of justification by faith, right? We're going to focus on his statements in the Heidelberg Disputation of 1518 and look at the relationship to biblical texts. We're going to look at Luther's claims regarding sola fide and the bound will, total depravity, and the nature of good works, which we've covered already, an overview of that. We'll look at biblical evidence, including Romans 2:14 and 15 on natural theology, which we've mentioned. James 2:26 on faith and works. I will come to James in the future again. Matthew 5:16 and Ephesians 2:10 on good works. Then we're going to look at the contradictions in Luther's position on human agency, the fallacy of what's called affirming the consequent. In other words, making assertions without having evidence to prove it, right? And this is in regards to what's called faith and works causation and the false dichotomy between total depravity and natural theology. So we're going to use some primary sources and very strict logical reasoning to demonstrate the contradictions in Luther's formulation. And we're going to pay very close attention to the historical and theological contexts in which this occurred. All right, so let's dive in. The Heidelberg Disputation 1, right? So the Heidelberg Disputation was held in 1518. This is a theological debate by Martin Luther to clarify and defend his views on justification by faith against prevailing Catholic teachings on merit and works. So it's a foundational document for the Protestant Reformation, which Martin Luther, as you know, had nothing to do with. And he was articulating key differences between Lutheran theology, broad Protestant theology, and Roman Catholic doctrine, particularly the concepts of grace, faith, and the nature of human sinfulness. We've already done a summary on this. Any comment before I go on, James?
No. I'm very. I should probably say. I should probably mute when I say, yeah, that's right.
That's cool. I mean, you're welcome to speak up. I mean, I'm not in a rush, but yeah, I don't like to do very long streams, but I want to finish the section today. So
go for it.
Okay, so let's look at theological extremism. So there are multiple theses in his Heidelberg disputation. Thesis number 3 claims that the works of man always seem attractive and good. They are nevertheless likely to be mortal sins. In other words, everything you do is very likely to be so sinful that you will be cast into hell. Everything you do, 90% of whatever is so bad, you are going to hell for it. And this contradicts Scripture's recognition of good works done by believers. Now, this correlates with all of Martin Luther's previous statements and suggests total depravity, a la Calvin. Calvin was only 9 years old when Martin Luther, or 8 years old when Martin Luther nailed, supposedly, the thesis to the door of Wittenberg Cathedral. So Calvin grew up in the shadow of Luther and, of course, just took Luther's ideas, ran with them, and made up his own stuff as well. Now, of course, this total depravity is a Gnostic concept that goes beyond Christian doctrine, and it goes to Calvin, and we can find all these antecedents in Gnosticism. So they just rephrase a lot of Gnostic ideas. Now, Matthew 5:16, Jesus says, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Similarly, Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." So we were made by Jesus. We were created through Christ. All things were made through Christ to do good works. And we were prepared in advance by God through Christ to do good works. So we're designed for good works. Christ is our model in whom we achieve fullness and are more empowered. So we were made to do good works. There's natural law on our hearts. We are capable of knowing morality. And in Christ, we reach the fullness of our ability to do good. Would you agree with my premise here as I go forward?
Oh, yeah. And the book of Revelation teaches this. If you don't mind, we don't have to go into it.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Revelation 14:12 and 13. It says to obey God and his commandments and the faith of Jesus Christ. And then the Spirit, the Holy Spirit himself says, for their labors and their deeds will grant them rest. Right? Revelation 14:12 and 13. So even the Holy Trinity is attesting to the idea that, there's the aspect of justification by faith, but there's also the aspect of the relation between justification and sanctification being that precisely what Matthew 5:16 says, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So, yeah, I mean, it's clear. I don't know where he got this mumbo jumbo from, but.
Yeah, well, if you read Ephesians and you take it as a standalone, if you read Ephesians, you go up to like Ephesians 18 or something, and you can actually see where he gets this idea. If you read that in isolation, then you will be able to see where his logic begins and how he founds this idea. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But then again, he ignores all of the counterexamples, as we will cover. Right, now James 2:26. Now, I'm not going to go, I've covered James in the past. I will cover James again in the future, where Martin Luther says James is wrong. Effectively speak, he says that is false. Just to sidetrack a bit, lots of Protestants go, well, Martin Luther read it and has a different interpretation. Now, there's a word for that. It starts with a B and it ends with a T.
Yeah.
And it has a male cow.
Schmolschmidt.
Yeah, it has a male cow in it, right? because Martin Luther reads James. Martin Luther rejects James. In Martin Luther's own writing, in his own words, in his own books, he rejects James. He knows exactly what James says, and he says that is false. He rejects James, and he chooses a completely different interpretation. So it's not just so when Protestants talk about Martin Luther, he interprets it differently because these people are either lying to you or they are vastly ignorant and are in need of a history lesson. So Martin Luther explicitly rejects James. He knows exactly what James says, and he rejects it and says, no, James is wrong. Throw that man out of the Bible. We're going to go down a different road completely. Any comment on that, James?
If you'll allow me to speak upon the
Please.
Greek of James 2,
Please go
which
ahead.
makes it impossible to refute.
Yeah.
In James 2, the word for justification there is dikaio in the Greek. Dikaio, right? And this is the salvific understanding of justification as alluded to, for instance, in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, Romans 2, as you brought, verse 15 specifically, Romans 5. Anyway, the point is, there's a reason why you can't change the definition of James 2 and its standing in the canonicity of the Bible. The Greek is totally in line with the rest of the Holy Bible. And there's good luck. Good luck trying to argue the idea that this does not belong. But of course, he argued so many cockamamie things. I'm not surprised. He argued for the abolishing of the book of St. James. So,
yeah, if you want to share some documents or on the screen, we can also do that. If you,
I didn't come prepared. You told me to join up, and I'm like, hey, that would be cool because you're very smart, and I really appreciate everything that you do.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, look, me too. I prefer to be prepared before I go on. I want to have my notes at hand. I don't like doing things off the cuff, because
Well,
I worry I make mistakes then. Yeah.
I know the scriptures, that's for sure. Like, I'll be okay with that. But if you want, I'll prepare something for us next time in terms of the reformers, and we'll go through something.
Yeah, by all means, it's a topic I'm going to be doing a lot on. By all means, yeah. Okay, so James 2:26. Now, look, I can do James 2:24, but I want to keep it simple, accessible to everyone, right? Faith without works is dead, right? That's what the words say. Faith without works is dead. Now, humans made in the image of God possess the capacity to do good through their rational and moral faculties. Welcome, Basiljet and Sandro. And guys, if you like the content, please tell your friends, share it with them, tell them to get on the channel right now. Tell them to stop doing what they're doing. No Netflix, get on the channel right now. And yeah, also please like, share, subscribe, all of that stuff. And yeah, so if you're made in the image of God, you possess the capacity to do good through your rational and your moral faculties. However, true and complete goodness is achieved through divine assistance. So, now I don't think these are controversial statements for us to make. There's the natural law, there is the law inscribed in your hearts. However, once you're baptized, once you accept Jesus, you then reach the fullness with Christ as the model. Would that be a fair statement to say, James? I mean, as a very simplified statement, is that fair?
The indelible mark of the original sin. Baptism goes to remedy. We'll make it a simple statement. It goes to remedy the mark of original sin with the indelible mark of baptism. If that's okay with you, I'll say that much.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too carried away.
Yeah. I don't want to make it too theologically deep. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. But of course, we need God's assistance because on our own, we are fallible humans. So we need God's assistance. We don't deny that. Right. And Jesus is our model. And with his grace, we can be better people. We have a model to strive towards, right? That's okay. Now, the question is, does James 2:26 indicate that faith naturally produces good works? All it says is faith without works is dead. Does that sentence say faith naturally produces good works? Now, this is a common interpretation. In fact, it's a common assertion. People will insist that is what it says. It doesn't say that. It says faith without works is dead, right? And we're going to use propositional logic. We're going to break this down through propositional logic. So the given statement is faith without works is dead, okay? Coffee without water is crunchy, okay? Presented as logical propositions, this becomes proposition 1. If faith exists without works, then that faith is dead. That is exactly what those words say. Proposition 2, dead faith is not genuine faith. I think that is a fair extrapolation. Dead faith is not good faith. Therefore, genuine faith must have works. Then your faith is alive. It is not dead. That is basic Aristotelian non-contradictory logic. So the interpretation claims that genuine faith naturally produces good works. Logical analysis. The original text establishes a conditional relationship. If faith has no works, you have dead faith. Restated, absence of works equals dead faith. Am I good so far, James?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, brother, real quick,
Please.
the Bible dichotomizes love with works, Galatians 5:6. So when you are to understand love, you are to understand the exemplification of love, just as Matthew 5:16 alludes to, right? And in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 2, excuse me, it says, though you must have all faith in the world, if you have not love, you are nothing. Right? So what is it saying? St. Paul is actually contradicting this modern Lutheran argumentation, where he's saying that if you have all faith but you have not love, you are nothing. And he's actually aligned specifically and properly with what you're teaching right now, brother. Furthermore, I want to say that in James 1, he speaks of the law of liberty. In James 1, you're not meant to read James just by James 2 thinking, hey, James is like, hey, let me just separate this section apart from this section. No, James in James 1 speaks of the law of liberty, right? And it's precisely perfect as to what you're proposing right now. So I hope I didn't take too much time there.
No, that's great. No, please, there's no particular rush. Thank you. I'd actually love for you to talk more about that in the future. That's very interesting what you mentioned about St. Paul or Peter, you said. It would be very interesting to actually talk about that at length, break that out into a separate section on that. It'll be very interesting for me.
Right. Amen.
Bazalgette says, Article 13 of the Church of England works done before the grace of Christ and the inspiration of his Spirit are not pleasant to God. There's the influence of Luther, the grubby paw of Luther right there. For they are not done as God hath willed. We doubt not, but they have the nature of sin. Fascinating. Thank you for that. Yeah. Let's continue. Now, in that statement, there is no cause and effect scenario. However, the interpretation makes an additional claim about causation, that genuine faith produces works. Now, this is a logical error known as affirming the consequent. The text only tells us that faith without works is dead. It does not necessarily mean, nor does it say this, that faith causes works. That is an assumption. That is an assertion. That is an implication that someone is making based on their own preference or bias or interest. Right. That is not what the words say. Agreed, James?
So are you saying here that, and just forgive me so that I could perhaps word it in a different manner, are you saying that they are proposing that a genuine faith automatically produces works?
In a sense, but they're saying that there's a cause-effect relationship, that once you get given faith, it's implying a bunch of stuff in the background. You were given faith, so now that you have faith, now you do works. That is a cause-effect relationship. That is a sequence. But there is no sequence applied here. None.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
This is their interpretation. This is them adding a whole bunch of stuff on top that is not there in the sentence. So let me continue. Yeah. All that this establishes is that works must be present with genuine faith.
Right. I thought so. Yeah.
So the direction of causation is an assumption. It's an additional assumption that is not contained in the premise. This is propositional logic. This is working. This is why Luther detested logic, because logic destroys his irrational ideas, his amateur ideas. Now, the Bible does say, by their works shall ye know them, not by their faith shall ye know them. Although Luther does stress that by their faith shall you know them, because he uses the crazy term, and I'll talk about it in the next episode when I talk about Luther's ideas on church governance. And he says, how do you know that these are good Christians? They preach the pure gospel. How do you know it's the pure gospel? God alone knows. So, now the correct logical conclusion is, for faith to be genuine or to be alive, works must be present. It does not say, first you're going to get faith, then eventually, because of that, you will now be able to do works. Am I correct, James?
Yeah, no, yeah. I don't see that.
So the interpretation that genuine faith naturally produces works is one, an ideological assertion.
Right.
It's an a priori assertion. It's a belief. It's an assumption. It's a particular interpretation from a given bias. It goes beyond the logical content of the text. And three, it adds a causal relationship or a sequence of events that is not supported by the original proposition. James 2:26 establishes correlation or a conjunction between faith and works. It does not establish causation. Do we see the distinction? Your thoughts, James?
No, you're on point. You're on point.
So the era of Luther and Calvin, they assert that faith causes works. Remember? Lack of free will. Now, this stems from total depravity doctrine where your will is bound. This claims that they claim that humans can only do evil unless elected. Therefore, good works must be caused by faith if you accept their starting premise, the starting premise that is not in the text. Does that make good sense, James?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I gotta say, the way you're breaking it down is very wise in the sense that, and forgive me, maybe you don't want to touch on this. And
please go ahead. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm just gonna ask you: would you relate this to the distinction between monergism and synergism?
You've lost me already, man.
Okay, so when we say one monergistic justification, that is to say, when God elects you, you automatically do God's bidding, right? But when you are synergistic, that synergism means that God chose you and then you reciprocated upon your will as second cause in a synergistic fashion to cooperate or to participate with the spirit that indwells you, right?
I think the second is the more classical interpretation, correct?
Right. And yes, and the reformers would hold to monergism, which would say that authentic faith automatically produces.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that, again, I've obviously heard those terms, but I have no great clarity on them. I'd need to go and research and read before I would be able to comment on that. But the simple fact is that I understand. I've listened to James White too many hours of my life I will never get back. I have listened to a whole bunch of James MacArthur, and you name them.
Yeah.
And
sorry to hear
all I hear is gobbledygook. So I'm trying to say, take these very complex, basically rocket ship physics arguments and breaking it down into, look, man, here's what the argument is in simple, easy to understand, everyday language we can all cope with. Understand? And once you look at it like that, it's a garbage argument because the premise is lack of free will. So does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So therefore, good works must be caused by faith is an assertion. It is an assumption. It is an assumption that doesn't have evidence to back it up. It's not present in the text. So this contradicts the logical structure of James 2:26. For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. Otherwise, we would have to say that, the body without spirit is dead. The two must be together. There must be a conjunction.
Right.
So faith without works is dead. So natural theology, Romans 2:14-15. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law. Now, here's obviously referring to the Mosaic law, the Ten Commandments, as you will. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness. So in other words, they don't have the law, but they have moral conscience, and therefore they can do good based on moral conscience. We are made in the image of God. This law of goodness is inscribed in our hearts. That's natural theology, which supports the position of us being able to choose. And this contradicts evidence that non-believers can do good. Right? So at least the position of Luther and Calvin contradicts all of the evidence, and there's lots that we can quote that non-believers can do good. So the conclusion is that the Lutheran Calvinist position imposes causation, where scripture only shows correlation. This violates both logic and biblical teaching about universal human moral capacity. Any thoughts before I move on to...
No, but St. Paul actually agrees with himself from Romans 2:12-16 in Acts. I should say St. Luke and St. Paul in Acts 17, right? Where he says that they were still doing things that were good, though they had unknown gods. It's interesting how he said that in Acts 17. right? And Christ says the same. He says, were you blind? If you were blind, yet you did good, you would not be privy to the law, for you do not know the law as you are blind. That's what Christ was saying in the Gospels as well. So everything that you're saying as to denote the cockamamie understanding of these reformers is on point.
Yeah.
And the great saints agree. And St. James,
Right.
of course, agrees.
Heretics makes a good point here. This then leads to the modern idea that just being a good person is enough to be saved. If good works only proceeds from true faith, then anyone who does good works is faithful and is saved and will be saved. And yeah, that's an assertion. That's an assumption. But you can understand how this leads to Gnosticism. Yeah. So there are logic errors here. Their position contains two logical errors. One, affirming the consequent. They incorrectly assume that if good works are present, then faith must be the cause. It's basically just making an assertion, right? And a false dichotomy. They create a false choice between total depravity and natural theology, ignoring that both can coexist. So the correct logical stance is while works are necessary for genuine faith, this does not imply causation, nor does it require a foundation of total depravity. Those are, as we would say back in my home country, hulle plak net stamps op. That translates, it's slang. They're just putting stamps on the thing. They're just putting stuff on it, right? Total depravity, where's that? Well, they made it up and because they like it, and bang, that goes in the mix, and everything goes in the blender, and off it goes. Right. Mm-hmm. So now Luther's theological determinism. So first of all, reminder: conclusions must not exceed the information provided in the premises. Right? Work with the evidence you have. Don't make assumptions, because that, as a very wise prophet once said in a movie, that makes an ass out of you and me. Right? So Luther believed you have no free will, with his entire thesis based on the assertion that without divine grace, humans are incapable of making free choices and are predisposed to evil. Now, oddly, atheists believe the very same, that you have no free will. They have material determinism. Luther has theological determinism.
Right.
Odd. This assertion creates a binary framework. Individuals are either locked into evil or freed by grace. Which one are you? Can you prove it? Neglecting the possibility of moral agency, or denying moral agency, or the influence of other factors, environment, personal reflection, etc. In fact, it denies that you can learn and improve and grow and change. It excludes potential for good choices influenced by factors outside of grace. There's no consideration for moral development. Am I making sense so far, James?
I feel like they encapsulate anything that is good. Wouldn't you agree, Brother Lloyd, that anything that is good is of God? So they encapsulate God into his grace, making God inferior to his grace. God is greater than his grace, in my opinion. Yeah. And so the point is that how do you say one can derive good only from the grace that God gives us? You have now made grace greater than God. God is greater than grace, and it's odd that they would come to this sort of conclusion. What do you think?
No, agreed. There's a limiting factor here. They are limiting him. It is odd. I have thought about that. I was going to do a page on that, but I decided not to. I thought it wasn't really relevant, because I also don't want to go from too many tangents. I try to keep it focused, because I had like almost double the pages, and I decided to cut it in half. I thought I could do the same job with less, verbosity. So, yeah, but it implies that grace is an exclusive solution for moral capability, which leads to theological implications regarding God's fairness and the nature of divine justice, because it means you have no agency again. So the fatal flaw when conclusions extend beyond the premises is that it undermines logical validity. They're adding assumptions to this whole theological calculus that are not in the text. This ends in claims that are unfounded, not supported by evidence or the reasoning presented, which leads to erroneous beliefs and misunderstandings and a lot of complications. Now, briefly, let's look at people who are righteous before the Ten Commandments. So there are figures in the Bible that are recognized as righteous by God who lived before the formal giving of the Ten Commandments, or even the establishment of the laws of Noah, which are the precursors to the Ten Commandments.
Right.
Abel was recognized for his acceptable offering to God. He did good, Genesis 4:4. Noah is a righteous man. He's described as a righteous man who walked with God and found favor. And I don't recall reading anything about God giving him grace. God saw that he was a righteous man.
Mm-hmm.
Job, acknowledged as a blameless and upright man. He must have been a Lutheran then, I guess, or a Calvinist, right, James?
Yeah.
Had to be.
He wasn't depraved. Anyway.
Yeah, he wasn't depraved. He was one of the elect. We have an early Calvinist right there. Job was an early Calvinist. Good grief. So he was acknowledged as a blameless and upright man who feared God and shunned evil. So that's Job 1:1. Now, these people exemplify the concept of natural law. They suggest that moral truths can be discerned through reason and observation of the world, independent of written commandments. Their righteousness indicates that moral understanding and ethical behavior are possible through innate human conscience and divine revelation prior to formal law. Abel, Noah, and Job demonstrate righteousness through actions without prior mention of receiving grace as a condition for their moral choices. So their good deeds are performed on their own volition, indicating inherent capacity for moral decision-making. So Luther suffered from a deeply flawed theological bias. He was guilty of selective interpretation and a lack of any kind of logical consistency. Your thoughts before I move to the next page? I'll probably do another 5 slides, I think.
Well,
Please.
I want to say quickly, guys, regarding the dichotomy between revelatory theology and natural theology. Just quickly, I'm not going to make it long. I can't even begin to tell you how many saints espouse natural theology, such as Saint Athanasius, Saint Maximus, Saint Basil. I have them all registered in my database. Saint Maximus, Saint Basil, Saint Gregory Nazianzus, even the Eastern Orthodox Gregory Palamas. Natural theology has been a notion understood by the early church. Even Tatian. Are you aware Tatian espoused natural theology? So
I think so. I've covered it in the past.
Yeah. So it's interesting how a guy in the 1500s came along and said, no, that doesn't work. But yeah, go ahead, brother. I just wanted to say that this here is indicative of natural theology. Abel had no set of precepts. Right, the precept was given in Genesis 2, verse 14 to 17 to his parents. Noah declared righteous. Job literally declared righteous. He would do the precepts of the law every morning for him and his kids. And it wasn't just simply the precepts of the law, but God's notion against Job was, are you viewing your righteousness against the law or against me? Because I am everything, not simply the law, which is precisely why I said God is greater than grace. But go ahead.
Right. No, good points. Okay, so Heidelberg Disputation 2. So now we're going to do a little bit of a change. I've covered that topic now. Now I'm going to go to the second part of the Heidelberg Disputation. I'm not going to cover at length the Heidelberg Disputation. I just want to highlight a certain few points that match what I'm discussing right now. Although, of course, I've watched on other channels like the Javier Perdomo, where they'll do an analysis of Luther's disputation against reason. Won't say a single line from the actual disputation, but go, here's 5-word summary. Here's a 5-line summary of it. It's awesome. You should read it. Yeah, I went through the entire thing. But let's have a look at Luther. Okay. But of course, you can read it if you'd like. I'm going to go through a few relevant points to show you the essence of what he's referring to, especially in relation to the context of you don't have any free will, you evil person, you. So there's thesis 13 in his disputation here. It says that free will exists in name only. That's a direct quote. Free will exists in name only. In other words, it doesn't exist. It's not real, yet can still commit mortal sin. Now you've got a logical contradiction about agency, because something that doesn't exist, that exists in name only, is causing you to do mortal sin. Like maybe you feed the poor, as someone mentioned, or help the sick or something, help old grannies across the road. Well, you're going to hell for that, you bastard, you. Right?
Well, not to mention you can't ground in reality something that is conceptual, right?
Exactly. But yeah, we're gonna cover this now. We're gonna take this one apart because this man is stupid. Martin Luther is the dumbest human to ever live, right after Muhammad. So how can something that exists in name only actively do anything. And this comes back to Martin Luther's nominalism. Philosophically, Martin Luther was a nominalist. Nominalism does not believe in objective reality. It's a broken philosophy. I've covered it hours worth on my channel. I've done in detail. It is trash. And people telling you Martin Luther wasn't a real nominalist, nonsense. Moving on. There's questionable biblical support. Many assertions lack any sort of direct scriptural support. Some interpretations stretch the biblical text beyond their contextual meaning. We've just covered that. There's very selective use of Augustine's writings without full context. And there are philosophical problems. The philosophical theses, for instance, 29 to 40, and we'll cover some of that, demonstrate a problematic rejection of reason. Martin Luther called reason satanic. He called logic and reason Satan's greatest whore, an enemy, a seducer, that's the whore of Satan. Right? And yeah, so Martin Luther had a very negative view of reason and logic. Now, thesis 29 suggests that one must become thoroughly foolish in Christ. Now, of course, people always try to be very charitable in dealing with Martin Luther. So, well, he's always verbose, or he'd always speak very bombastically. He meant, well, we've already spoken about how Martin Luther and his fellow Benedictines or Augustine monks, whatever, they were very much against education. They wanted you stupid. I've covered that on the channel. But so to philosophize well, he says, he who wishes to philosophize by using Aristotle without danger to his soul must first become thoroughly foolish in Christ. In other words, immune to reason. And he called Aristotle the agent of Satan, Satan's tool, Satan's helper. Okay? This is what he thought of Aristotle. He thought Aristotle was satanic. Logic was satanic. Right? He had an extremely negative view. So he creates a very false dichotomy between faith and reason, and then atheists do the very same. Where did they get it from? Well, Martin Luther. Right. Your thoughts, James, before I go on.
I'm just going to ask you a question. Do you think his disdain for Aristotelian thought stems from his disdain for St. Thomas Aquinas? Because I know St. Thomas Aquinas is a student of St. Albert Magnus. St. Albert Magnus in church history is responsible for the Latin translations of Aristotle.
Yes, I mean, look, I've covered this at length. So, of course, there was the financial aspect, but of course, there's the issue around scholasticism. He despised scholasticism. Now, of course, they'll speak of, well, but Protestantism also has a proud scholastic tradition. The Protestant scholastic tradition is not the same at all. Same name, completely different thing.
Right.
As the scholastic tradition in Catholicism. The scholasticism in Protestantism, and I've covered this on my channel, I've done it a couple of times, I've spent significant time on it, is a method of debate. It's a method of disputation. It's a way of undermining logic. It's a way of winning arguments. It's basically sophistry. It is basically a way of using language to win arguments, not to find truth. This was their methodology. I've covered this before at length. But in name only. But so now his dismissal of logic is a defense mechanism. He wants to shield his very subjective theological views from rational scrutiny because logic and reason expose the errors in his thesis. I've probably annoyed a lot of people. I see like 10 people have dropped out of the viewership because I'm probably taking a dunk on their beliefs. So, yeah, well, I mean, I know doing Luther doesn't make me popular. So, now, there's some concerns here, pastoral concerns. The emphasis on works being mortal sins leads to despair rather than hope. I mean, everything you do is evil, so of course you end up in despair. You end up grasping at straws, desperate to be good, to do good, to be seen as good, to be loved, right? So of course you can be rescued by faith alone, or in other words, by your imagination, by the voices in your head. James?
No, go ahead, man. That's awesome.
So now this contradicts the biblical message of grace and transformation. Now there are departures here from both sound logic and traditional Christian understanding, right? So if we look at his thesis number 13, free will, Luther writes, oh wow, Hollywood Big Boss, thank you very much. If you do a panel on Luther, please invite Sam Shamoon, William Albrecht, and Gary Mikuta. Sam Shamoon doesn't talk to me. Sam Shamoon decided one day that he was not going to speak with me anymore. So you are welcome to talk to him about that. I was warned that this would happen. It did happen. But yeah, that's a discussion for another day. That's why I haven't been on Sam's channel. He just cut me off one day. So moving on. Free will, Martin Luther writes, after the fall, exists in, but I'll be happy to do a panel with these guys. I'd be very happy to do so. But yeah, so if that happens, do let me know. But I must also warn you, the fact that I'm on YouTube doesn't mean that people talk to me. I write to more people than you would realize, and I get either ignored or just rejected. And that's just how that is. Okay, so Martin Luther writes, free will after the fall exists in name only. And as long as it does what it is able to do, it commits a mortal sin. So, in other words, it exists in name only. In other words, it doesn't exist.
Right.
But it makes you commit mortal sin. So the thing that doesn't exist makes you commit sin. Okay? Now, there's a logical contradiction here regarding agency. As something that exists nominally, and Martin Luther was a nominalist,
Right.
can actively perform actions. So if free will has no substantial reality because it exists in name only, it cannot engage in moral actions or sins. Am I correct, James?
Yeah, basic philosophy, fellas and ladies and gentlemen. Something that is conceptual is not grounded in reality. It needs to be predicated to something that is in reality for it to be, in essence, like the brother wrote, real. You know,
Yeah.
If you're gonna say something is nominal, then you're denoting it as conceptual, and so therefore, it cannot be something that affects anything in reality of yours or your reality. It's a contradiction in and of itself.
And then Martin Luther, of course, doubles down, piles on. Free will has power to do good only in a passive capacity, but it can always do evil in an active capacity. So the thing you don't have, free will, that exists in name only, cannot do good, can only do evil, but can do good in a passive capacity, except everything you do is likely a mortal sin, but it can do evil in an active capacity. Yeah, that sounds like he needs some meds. James?
Yeah, I was about to say medication. Yeah, something lithium or something. I don't know.
Yep. So the man's logic is putrid. Putrid. I mean, honestly, the man he's irrational. It's crazy when you read this guy's stuff. So his nominalist stance, which puts subjective interpretation over objective reality, he's a nominalist, separates his theology from logical consistency and rational discourse. It's just trash. So he fails to coherently explain how a nominally existent free will can participate in moral actions, either good or evil, but he insists it can actively do evil. Something that doesn't exist, that it's your imagination, it's in name only, it's not real, but it's making you do stuff. It's the voices in your head. James.
And you would have to blame God for that, right? By the way.
Yeah, God is making you do evil. It's exactly the conclusion. God is evil.
You would have to blame God for your concepts that aren't in reality but are affecting your reality. This is crazy, man.
Yeah, this is Martin Luther. So I think we have like 3 more slides. And so Occam's razor versus sola fide. So Luther confused and bamboozled people with BS. Okay. For the B, I refer here to a male cow. For the S, I refer to Luther's little friend here. So now the simple explanation is that being made, this is the final slide, sorry, but I could go on 1 or 2 more, but they may not be might still be a little bit raw. So the simple explanation is that being made in God's image allows humans to understand and pursue good through natural law and conscience. Faith in Christ enhances and fulfills your capacity for goodness, empowering you to act more righteously. Now, this simple view is coherent and clear without the complications of Luther's whack job assertions and stupid atheist mental gymnastics about not having free will. So those are my thoughts. I wrap that portion up there. Your thoughts, James?
How does he reconcile theosis? If there's a nominal understanding, right? But theosis is to be affected in reality, right? So 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 3-7, right? That we are participating in God's divine nature, right? How then can we hold to anything that Lutherfer is talking about if we are to understand that we are participating in God's divine nature in a real sense? I'm confused.
Well,
How
God
do you
wants
even
to do evil.
but how do you affirm salvation if it's just in your mind?
Um,
And it's predicated to theosis. You get what I'm saying?
it makes no sense. Hence, you've got all of the gobbledygook to try to justify it and to hide it. Hence, if you read I mean, I think the Westminster Confession, whatever, if you read the section on free will and whatnot, it's like it's dense, it's pages, but you could break it down into a couple of paragraphs if you just took out the legalese. I think they know that what they're doing is indefensible, so they hide it behind this stew of words.
I would love for that man to be alive right now. I would want to ask him a few questions. I'd love to see how he would reconcile it.
Yeah.
So you're saying all this stems from the idea, well, not all this, but a lot of it stems from the idea that he wouldn't be given a position in bishopric?
That's one aspect of it. Also, he was, and I mean, look, I understand there's lots of views, lots of historians have written stuff, but man, I've spent the last 4 years reading this man's trash. And he was also mentally ill. He had certain issues, and he was trying to find a way out of his own mental prison, of his own mental and emotional anguish. So he figured, I am incapable of finding my way out, because I believe he was a very twisted, often very corrupt, immoral man. And he found a way to go, hey, you know what? Faith alone, as long as I believe I am good, off we go to the races now. He was trying to solve his own emotional and philosophical and theological dilemmas.
And if I'm not mistaken, in his German rendition of the Bible, right? I'm not talking about what he did to Romans 3. That's a very used argument. But in his rendition, didn't he make a pretty penny from that? Didn't, I mean, he sold 1,800 copies, and each one was of the value of half a cow. If I was reading the scales from back then and how much they were worth, I think you would know better. Definitely, you would know better. But
look, I'm not entirely familiar with that. The thing is, I do know, for instance, there's the story that he was poor and came from he came from a middle class family, right? And but apparently, the fact is he came from a family of means. So the idea of Martin Luther being poor and working his way up and being barefoot and not having shoes and all of that nonsense is just there to create sympathy, make him a sympathetic figure, make you see him in a positive light, someone who worked hard and so, but actually he apparently came from means. His father owned some mines. His father was a well-to-do gentleman. And, but when you look at it, his father, I mean, rumor has it, his father was a murderer who had to run away from the scene of a murder he had committed and took his family and disappeared to another town. He was mentally and emotionally and physically abused by his parents, both of them. He was beaten by his teacher and his parents, and so this left him with emotional and psychological scars. And he went in under very poor pretenses or for the wrong reasons into the monastery. There's a whole bunch of things, and also, I mean, so yeah. Look, I'm still trying to unwind all of this because there's so many other things I'm trying to unwind. But there's more and more evidence coming out. But obviously, I'm discovering that historians have access to data, to information on Luther that we don't have. There's stuff untranslated in Latin, in old Gothic German that you cannot scan, that you have to do by hand. And there's access that these people have to material that writes Luther. For instance, the story that his wife, Katharina von Bora, for instance, they weren't, properly speaking, married, and while Luther was off doing whatever Luther does, in fact, he was going on what you'd call pub crawling across Germany. So he was having his drunken sort of things, off he would go, his theological tours. But she was keeping the bed warm with the other monks in the house, shall we say?
Yeah, no. Wasn't she like a defunct nun? I think.
She was a nun. So look, there's a lot of rumors and stories around. I'm still trying to get all the details, but apparently she wasn't exactly, shall we say, let's just say look, apparently the story of the village bicycle apparently applies to her while she was with Luther.
That's horrible. It's actually terrible. You know what? Let's pray for these people that are stuck in this cultish understanding to get out of it.
Yeah. No, I mean,
Your dichotomy of natural theology and the relegation of agency is pretty deadly. It's definitely difficult to reconcile. How do you reconcile two things that are diametrically opposed, that you're proposing are one of the same? I'm not talking about you, them. So what would you say to that much?
look, I'm using logic. I'm using a great deal of logic, and this is what Luther wanted to avoid. And also, I want to get past all the sophistry, all of the verbosity. I just want to say, look, let's break it down to a simple argument. And also take it back to the source. And once you do that, I think you can reveal that all of the theological waffle you see on the stage from James MacArthur, I mean, he's great at sophistry and just confusing you with gobbledygook. Once you break it down like this, Luther's theology is trash. I mean, I've said it over and over. I've said it for years now. And I can do one more page from my next week's slides, just so the audience can see where we're going with this. But if you'd like, I can show you.
No, go for it. But I did want to propose some Old Testament, just one or two Old Testament scriptures that would definitely cause a lot of damage to the Lucifer position.
Cool. Sure.
So in 1 Kings 17 to 24, when Elijah heals the widow's child that is trouble breathing, do you remember that one?
Yes.
Yeah, and he heals the child, right? And then she affirms that, oh, God is truly working through you. That's verse 24. God is working through Elijah the Tishbite. But in the next chapter, Elijah meets with Obadiah and Ahab, excuse me. Ahab being an idolater, of a king, and Obadiah being very zealous for Yahweh. Okay? They were going through the drought. Of course, we know the story of Elijah and the drought. They were going through the drought, and the king goes one way, Obadiah goes the other way, right? And then Obadiah meets Elijah. Elijah tells Obadiah to tell the king that I'm here. So Obadiah goes and tells the king that he's here. And then finally, Elijah meets the king. And then the king says to him, well, hey, man, aren't you the guy who brings despair? Aren't you the guy who brings judgment from God? And you know what Elijah says, Lord? He says, bro, God's not doing this. You did this. Literally. And this is like the ultimate decimation for anyone who believes in some sort of monergistic view of salvation. Elijah literally says, God's not doing this to you. You did this to you.
Right.
If you want to see the verse number, it's 1 Kings 18, 16 to 19, where Elijah literally confirms precisely what the ancient church is confirming. He confirms it hands down. There is no monergism. There is no, you're automatically reprobate or you're automatically saved by, your mental conceptual assent to faith.
Yeah. I mean, my theology doesn't see here. Once shaved, always shaved. I shaved 2 days ago.
So, I mean, these are there. It's interesting. It's true what you said. It's definitely true what you said. He was having mental issues. He perhaps was an ill man. He was a sick man. And I think perhaps he projected what he thought remedies for his illnesses were into his soteriological or theological understandings. And now we have, the consequences of that. What are your takes on what I just said?
He was beyond just being psychologically or spiritually sick. The man was physically extremely sick. The man had a litany of ailments. And when I've covered them before, and it's gross. It is gross when you read what was ailing this man and the things he was doing. And I can't help to think he was like afflicted. It's like something demonic afflicting him, or his internal state being reflected in his external health. And then the things he was doing just were unhealthy. I don't know if you know, I've spoken about the historians that wrote that Martin Luther was drinking. You know what I'm referring to here? or do I have to be explicit?
No, be explicit because I really don't.
Okay, so this is, and I
I'm putting you in a
quoted the
position. Right?
references. I quoted the references. I provided the source. It's from a biography of Martin Luther by two Protestant theologians, Lutherans or believers in Luther, who wrote that to heal his numerous medical remedies, Martin Luther was eating horse dung mixed into a, let's just call it a smoothie. And he was also drinking smoothies made up of pig. You know, the thing that comes out of the back part of a pig?
I'm
And
good,
I
bro.
don't mean,
Actually, I regret asking you. Actually,
and I don't mean bacon. And I don't mean bacon. The thing that comes out of the back part of the pig after it's done eating, they would scoop that up and Martin Luther would drink it. Do you understand the kind of man we're dealing with here?
Yes, sick.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's disgusting. I regret asking you if I'm totally frank right now.
So this is apparently, and they try and phrase it in the nicest possible way. Oh, you know, these medieval people are so, you know, haha, look how primitive they are. I mean, look, personally, there's nothing that I could think of under any circumstances where I would think that drinking the thing that comes out of the back part of the pig would be good for my health. But that's just me.
That's utterly disgusting.
And this is the Luther that people don't know about. And I'm trying to, now there are stories that I can tell about Luther that are common, but I don't have the evidence for them. I don't have solid evidence, so I leave those out. I can tell you all the rumors and things, but I'm just dealing with what I can prove. So, and it's bad enough.
You have access to I know you said some things you don't have access to because they're frail and they can't handle imagery.
Some of them, no. I think some of them are. Look, I know for a fact. I've seen it from scholars, and I've seen references that I can't find. I've bought everything I can on Luther. I've collected everything I can on Luther. But they are clearly his own papers, his own letters, his own works that are untranslated in Latin. Many of them are available, but they're only in Latin or they're in Gothic script, Gothic German. You can't scan them. So you have to laboriously read them by hand out of ancient Gothic German. So therefore, when the question is why, understand?
Yeah. Though you're
And
not
some of
gonna
them
get
are, yeah.
you're not gonna get them either, man. They're very hard to come across, Lloyd. They're very, very hard to come across.
And there's a reason why I think they make them unavailable.
Well, what's your reasoning for that? They're trying to shelter the world from his true thoughts or his.
Because Luther was evil. The man was twisted. And if that came to light, if the truth of Luther came to light, people would be embarrassed. It's like Muhammad. I don't see any difference between the story of Muhammad and the story of Luther. They're both false.
Right. Well, yeah, no. Do you think there are any redeeming qualities to Luther?
I don't care. Look, I mean, Hitler would have had great redeeming qualities. He was a very good organizer, fantastic speaker. He was very loyal to his wife. He loved his dog. He was a good vegetarian. I'm sure he had wonderful. None of that matters. None of it matters because he bent it all towards evil. So when people look and when people go, well, you know, we also have to be fair and look at his good qualities. I don't give a shit because none of that's relevant. None of it is relevant. All of the grace that he had, all the goodness that he had, he used it for evil purposes. So it is utterly irrelevant.
Right. No, I completely agree. Sick man. And I think what you're doing, brother, is a great service for the world. And I'm not kidding. I think it's great. And I really hope you continue going and don't stop, keep smashing this this Islamism. It's Islam, bro.
Yeah.
I've got earlier. Look, so when we talk about scholasticism, we talk about a particular view called double ultimacy that is beheld by the Calvinists, though they hate that we say that of them. But it's true.
Double predestination. Yeah, no, they do. They do hold it.
Well, double predestination is different because in scholasticism, we would say, okay, well, we can argue that in a singular view of predestination, you can argue for God's foreknowledge, but God's foreknowledge is not going to be divorced from God's determination of us. Now, that's fine to say, right? As long as we say that there's a synergistic understanding in that view, meaning God is first cause, we are second cause. However, we participate with God that indwells us. We align our will to the will of God. There is something we must do in view of reciprocity, though God is first and we are second. Okay, we agree with that. We agree with that.
Yeah.
But the problem with the Lutherfer and John Cathar, the problem with them is that they espouse double ultimacy, meaning you reprobate. You are reprobate before you are conceived. That's in essence what they're
yes.
holding.
Oh no, I've covered that. No, I've discussed. I've done a series on Calvin. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's a double bind. It's Gnosticism. You're evil. I mean, it's really just a very dark, negative view of humanity. It's horrible. Yeah, and Luther starts that, and Calvin takes it further.
Right, and it's sick. It's Allah Akbar, bro. Because Allah said in his ahadith, he said, Allah made you for hellfire in your father's loins. And he
I have
made
covered
heaven.
those. I've covered this, and I've mentioned the similarities, the parallels with Luther and with Calvin to Islam. And yeah, I'm going to be doing a series on Unitarianism, which is Chrislam, which is Islam light, Christian,
Right.
which is Islam in Christian clothing. I'll be talking about that because that gets wacky. The Albanian Christianity is. Do you think you'll make a series on sedevacantism? I've actually done a number of videos on that already. I just want to finish Luther so I can go back to doing some other stuff. So yes, I have an entire series on the SSPX and the sedevacantist movement. I've done a number of talks on that topic. You can go back and check. I've taken that apart, and but I will come back to it because I did extensive work on the encyclicals of various popes and going back through history, looking at these various claims, and they don't hold up. These people, their claims do not hold up. But I will get back to that. Let me just finish Luther. I just want to finish Luther, get that, and then I can move on to the next thing. Because then I want to get into the Catholic stuff. That'll be very interesting.
Hey, what are your position? What's your position, brother? If you don't mind me asking, if you want to share, what's your?
Look, I've never hidden any of my positions. I've been very
I don't
blunt
know because I don't know
about my. No, look, I mean, everyone knows on the channel, I've been very blunt about where I stand, what I think. I haven't made a secret of it. Nothing. So people know exactly if they decide not to like me and want to move on, that's fine. They know exactly where I stand. So I grew up in the Anglican Church. I come from a very much church-involved family with many priests, bishops, and so on, highly involved, very well ranked. I grew up around the church people, highly placed people in the church, including Bishop Desmond Tutu and others. So yeah, I mean, I grew up in the church, but I always wondered about why there was the animosity to the Catholic Church, to the Apocrypha, things like that, things of this nature, why certain things weren't discussed. And then, of course, as I grew up and I started to see how the Anglican Church has kind of gone astray, let's put it mildly, then that sort of led me to say, well, okay, I'm done with those guys. Although the traditional high church Anglican service is almost identical to the Catholic service. So for me, it's very easy to make the switch. It's almost the same service. The beliefs, the ideas, it's pretty much 95% the same thing. So I attend. No, I'm not I attend the Catholic Church. I'm not formally a Catholic. I'm married into a Catholic family. So, but I go to the Catholic Church. There is only one English-speaking Catholic church in all of Warsaw, so everything's in Polish, and it's a little bit. I wouldn't say they're necessarily liberal in theology, but they're liberal in practice. They're not quite up there with the disco ball and the drum set, but it's a little too close for my liking.
Okay, so are you? Do you mind if I ask, or would I be disrespectful if I ask? Because some people don't want to get into the intricate. Do you plan on, being confirmed in the Catholic Church, or?
No, I have no problem with that. It's just I'd like to find a church that speaks English and then I can live with. There's that. And I mean, look, you've got this comment by this one guy because he was saying, gosh, where's this comment by this fool? Okay, all live chat. Yeah, so look, I mean, I've spent significant time, you probably know a little bit about my channel, but I've spent significant time taking shots at Luther and Calvin, not based because I just don't like them. Yes, I don't like them, but I don't like them for very good reasons, I think. but I've also defended the Catholic Church on a historical level and on a doctrinal level. Because when I go through the early church fathers, all I find is Catholicism. I don't find the Baptists. I don't find Martin Luther. And then also, like when I did research, especially on the Black Legend of the Spanish Inquisition, 95% of that story is false. In fact, the vast majority of that story is completely false. And so when I start looking at all of these claims people are making, and I read up on them, and I'm like, none of it's true. Someone's lying. And the Catholic Church, while you can find issues, much of it is exaggerated. Much of it is just absolutely made up lies. So I've spent significant time, although, of course, this upsets Catholics too, or for whatever reason. So, I mean, I upset everybody, I guess. One ready says, the Pope, like all men, are wicked sinners. You good Christians need to wake up. Now, the thing is, these statements are unspecific.
Misleading.
They're misleading. So the Pope, of course, is a man and he's a sinner. That there is nothing wrong with that. That is perfectly true. Even he'll tell you that. In fact, that's in the Catholic doctrine. But when you say you good Christians need to, what are you implying? You see, what is not being said? And that's always the question here. Because look, I need to just tell the audience, for those who don't know me, I don't know you either. And trust me, I have little patience with stupidity. I've spent far too many years of my life, far too many hours working through this very carefully, very logically, seriously double checking, triple checking, and I have little patience with stupid people. So yeah, I'm not going to entertain that.
So this stems from the misinformation of the evangelical world upon
it was an active campaign. It was an active campaign. Luther and his friends through the press conducted an active international campaign to smear the Catholic Church. It was an organized government level political leadership, highly financed propaganda smear campaign that they set out on, one of amongst which was to rob the Catholic Church blind. It was a criminal operation.
Right. My friend Eduardo, he's a genius and this stuff. I actually would love to bring him on at some point. You would love, he's got the history down between the proto-reformers, the reformers, and Catholicism. He's got it down pat. You and him would have a great conversation about that. Right. However, the dude that wrote that, the one that you pinned, it's because there's a straw man. They don't understand the charism of infallibility in the view of faith and morals. Mm-hmm. And they often conflate it with impeccability, which we would argue no one is impeccable, even though we would not.
No, they're always misrepresented. However, from a Lutheran, or let's say from a Protestant position, the belief is that I have been touched by grace, the Holy Spirit speaks through me, therefore everything I say is correct and everyone else is wrong. That is just based on arrogance, but it's exactly the same claim. But of course, it contradicts the guy next to them, which is illogical.
Right. So I just want people like that guy that you pinned, like, to stop saying stupid stuff. Respectfully, please stop saying stupid stuff. Please stop straw manning. Please steel man a position. No real Catholic will ever tell you that the head of the church is impeccable.
Yeah.
Wake up. Stop with the nonsense.
Yeah. So yeah, I have school tomorrow. I've gone longer than I typically do. I try to cut it off like an hour and a half if I do a solo. So a couple of hours when I do with the group. I try not to go on forever, like 6 hours, like some people.
Yeah, man. It's very nice that you had me. Thank you so much, man. God bless you.
Yeah, we can do this again.
Yeah, for sure. And you're definitely welcome to come on my show. I go on every Sunday at night after mass. Right. I do what's called Sunday Night Fellowship. Yesterday, I did something about the hypostatic union from the fathers, from Chalcedon, and from the Holy Bible. So it would be great to have you on, Brother Lloyd. And love you guys, and go forth in faith, hope, and love.
We'll be in touch. Take care, guys. Thank you all very much for spending the time with us. Thanks for the support, and we shall see you all soon. Take care, guys. Good night.
God bless.